So when the girls were 4 and 3 years old, I was doing a lot of business travel, and I am a jumpy flyer. And the thought that came into my head every time I boarded a plane was, if this plane went down, my girls would not remember a single thing about me. This is the kind of positive thinking that lawyers are known for. But out of that came this real interesting question of what would I wanted them to know about certain challenges that they're going to have in life.
Today I'm talking to Mark Hsu, author of Please Open in the Event of My Death, a book he wrote so that if something would ever happen to him, his young daughters would still have his voice, his stories, and his life lessons. What started as a deeply personal project became a powerful, funny, thoughtful guide to living a good life. Something I think every parent, partner, and reflective human will relate to. And specifically because of Father's Day, I think this conversation is going to be very relevant for our listeners. Welcome, Mark.
Stephen, thank you so much for having me.
So you've had a very successful career, but you don't center the book around that. What was there? Was there a moment when your old definition of success stopped working, and what can others take from that shift about reevaluating what success really means in midlife or parenthood?
I have a strong imposter syndrome that still lurks beneath. But I think, I grew up with old school Asian parents who emphasized a lot about professional success. Um, the more I studied, and the more I ended up in this world of very high achievers, I started to notice that a lot of these people didn't necessarily have a well-balanced life. They were far greater than I in so many ways in terms of professional and academic success, but there's a cost to that as well. And I think there's, whether it's a lack of a family life, or just a lack of perspective on the world, or just not really having fun, really. I think there are a lot of people who aren't really nice people. I mean, I wanted to find something that I could be comfortable with, my own definition of success, which involves more of a balanced life.
What I love about the book is how human and humble it is, and especially when you talk about being a dad. You share your missteps as well as your advice. So what are some of the lessons that you've learned as a parent that you share in the book?
I identified all these qualities that are important, which are, humility, integrity, kindness. And so once I wrote those down and I started editing and so forth, I started to focus on that a lot more as I was parenting my own kids. So it had a really pleasant snowball effect where uh, the kids were kind of learning in real time as I was writing them down.
So how are you able to impart that in the day-to-day parenting your girls? Do you have some stories that you can share on experiences that you've had where you're able to do that?
Just to take a recent example, one of my daughters, she plays club volleyball. I think a lot of the parents take the losses a lot harder than they do. But, I was watching a very close game, and my daughter, she was up to serve, and she tossed a serve a little bit too low. And instead of just letting it drop, she caught the ball, which meant that the point went to the other side. And then she started, it was a critical point of the game, and she started to really tear up. Teammates were trying to console her. And they ended up losing. And I said to her, listen, I'm really, comforted her, obviously, as to how it went. But I said to her, you can't do that. That's like you've kind of detracted or distracted the team, and you've made it all about yourself in terms of your being upset, which is understandable. But when you have to kind of put that aside and make sure that everybody's focused on the next point. So that was kind of like a very concrete example of just being present, like a perfect teaching lesson at a perfect time. Because without that real world example, for me to just say this kind of as a theoretical thing wouldn't have had as much impact. I think she took it to heart.
In the book, you talk about presence quite a bit, right? And I think, can you share a moment that reminds you what being present as a parent really looks like, and what might that moment teach someone who's feeling distracted, overwhelmed? Because
Yeah.
parenting obviously is hard. It's
Yeah.
hard when you have little ones, and it's in some way even harder when you have teenagers.
Sure. I was actually just telling the girls this the other day about how I'm so glad the smartphone wasn't around when they were smaller. When they were growing up, I had the BlackBerry with a color screen. And I think I fought a brick breaker addiction for about 2 years, but nothing close to the kind of distraction that a smartphone affords now. And I think, to be honest, I think that's really something that needs to be, we always talk about the smartphone and what it does to young minds and stuff, but I think it can be just as detrimental to the parent as well. And sometimes you just have to enforce some of these boundaries yourself, and to set rules for yourself, put it away, do not disturb, and just, whether it's, when you're reading to your kids or just having playtime or whatever, because they might not be able to articulate it. You may be too small to articulate something, but they can tell. And there's definitely some sort of an effect. I have to think that it does. And so I think compartmentalizing, and setting aside times, and will allow the parent to be more mindful of their parenting.
Yeah, and also how can we tell our kids not to be on their phone if we're on the phone all the time? Presence is very hard, even without a phone, right? Because I had big jobs in the past, specifically when my oldest was a teenager,
Mhm.
and I had thousands of employees who reported to me, and they came to me for problems all the time. And then I came home and I wanted to spend time with my kids, and of course they don't want to spend time with you when you want to spend time with them, and they don't want to have the difficult conversations with you on your terms but on their
Right.
terms.
Right.
And I was just often not emotionally available because I was just so drained. So I
Yeah.
think that that's another part of presence. How do you have a big job? How do and I mean, I'm sure you're dealing with problems all day long. You're a litigator, so that's essentially the definition of your job.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
how do you deal with that when you get home? How do you shut it off?
I've found when the kids were small, and even now, the best times to have really good quality time is simply walking with them to school. I guess, if we were in the suburbs, it'd be going for a drive.
Yeah.
As long as your kid isn't listening to music through headphones, it doesn't mean that you have to start being all chatty and stuff. But and then also there are times when they'll be so sullen and quiet that you will think to yourself, "Good God, this has been such a waste of time for both you and me." But I think when you're walking and you just start asking random questions, the conversations that you'll have are can be really surprising, and very much can be anything from friends to kind of what they want in terms of, their aspirations, or just, what makes them laugh and sad. I've always subscribed to the theory that no matter how busy you are, you can always make time. I think if you go in there with a curious attitude about just, I think kids tend to shut down as soon as they sense some sort of judgment,
Yeah.
right? If you say, if they hear kind of some sort of scolding tone or a kind of judgy tone, then that's when they shut down. And honestly, if it's just, I mean, if you can make them laugh hard, and if you can, then there's, they'll kind of see you as, okay, that is tolerable.
The whole book really starts, from a place of fear, right? As you said about, the plane, but the result feels really empowering. What did you write through fear teach you about moving forward when things aren't, certain? And what could somebody dealing with anxiety or transitioning to, take from that?
I devote a whole chapter in the book to fear and how
Yeah.
it can be. It's obviously not pleasant, and but it can be a really powerful motivator. I mean, I talk about the really long and winding road to getting my first job out of law school. It's really unsustainable after a while. That this,
Hmm.
if you live in constant fear, it, it's really going to take a toll. I think what I've tried to do more recently is to not focus on the fear and to try to flip it as what's the opportunity here, what do I get to do as opposed to what do I have to do. And so it's been helpful for me in terms of just a different mentality shift, and to really try to embrace the opportunity as opposed to be scared of the consequence.
So how do you teach that, and how do you do that? So my oldest has graduated and is looking for a job, and it's a very difficult market right now.
Sure, sure.
And of course, when you've gone through the job search, you know that at some point you'll find a job.
Mhm.
But also a lot of my clients, right, they who go through that process, they're in the middle of it, and it just feels so hopeless, and so the fear really kicks in. Do you have certain coping mechanisms that you've shared with your daughters?
Getting to the root of it and asking, and this is kind of very apt because my older daughter is a junior in high school, and she's already in the middle of the whole college process, right? And so there have been obviously times when she's had just a lot of difficulty in terms of coping with the pressure. And so in those instances, I just kind of cut to it and say, what are you scared of, right? What are you scared of? Well, I won't get into a good school. Okay, so but if you get into school, and what if you do really well at this school? Then what? And you kind of asking empowering questions, but then also asking yes, no questions to kind of direct her towards, a certain result. But it's really about just saying, what is the worst thing that could happen?
So is it in a sense, does it have something to do with control? Learning to be okay with the outcome no matter what it is.
When we don't know, when the unknown is usually scarier than kind of a bad result. And so that's something that, I've certainly used for my kids as well. And whenever I have a certain observation, I'll share it with my kids. And so they happen to be very interested in psychology. So I think they're more receptive to it than maybe some other kids. But I think they do appreciate when I have an observation that rings true to them.
So you said you've learned to let go of control, in the book, and especially as a parent. What helped you loosen that grip on control and you know
Well, comes back to my old school Asian parents who were very controlling. They're very strict, and they wanted me to follow a certain path. They wanted me to study in a certain way. They had very high hopes for me, high expectations for me. There's a certain cost to that when you don't have that kind of freedom, right? And I think that's something that I've chafed at for many years. And so I think one thing that I wanted to do, at least for my kids, was to give my kids more freedom, to let them make their own decisions, to kind of, it doesn't mean I'm hands off. I certainly tell them when I think they're not doing things right or what they could be doing better, but it's nowhere close to what I went through. But it's still tough. It's really tough. I can't. I'm really biting my tongue at times when you do that, and you allow them to have control. It also signals to them that you trust them, right? And they're aware that I'm trusting them, and they are trying very hard to not abuse that trust. They'll be away in college. I keep on telling you, they'll be away in college, and I'm not going to be looking over their shoulder to make sure that they're not looking at TikTok, 6 hours a day, and that they're not eating all sorts of terrible food. They have to know, do things themselves, and really monitor themselves. So hopefully that's kind of getting through.
I remember when Sabrina was little, it was impossible to get her out of the house.
Uh,
You know, sh- it just took forever, and it was a struggle every day. And I tried all different kinds of things to do, the star system and like encouragement and all this stuff. And then at some point, I was just like, "You are responsible to get your butt to school on time. I'm no longer going to wake you up. I'm no
mm.
longer going to rush you out the door." And I think that once I made that decision, she actually always started being on time.
So it was really you kind of almost giving her trusting her to do it. I think when she realized she had this responsibility, then she rose a challenge. Getting to school in the mornings was really hellish for about several years, and there was just a lot of yelling and all this stuff. I think that's, I think it has to be age appropriate, right? I think it needs to be at the beginning. You have to say, this is how we do things. These are the rules, and these are the things, and you have to abide by them. And then if they have questions about it, then you kind of explain logically why these are the rules, why it's beneficial. I think also actually them babysitting other kids might have
Hmm.
also contributed that as well, because they saw that, and they kind of thought, oh, this is why these are the rules.
I find this one of the hardest parts of parenting. Right? I know I need to be able to let my children fail for them to learn and to give them the responsibilities that they need so that they also feel that I trust them and that I value them. But there are certain things in life that can be very painful where we're just afraid as parents, right? Where
Yeah,
we're parenting out of fear rather than out of letting it be. And I think that that's a universal. I think maybe parents now, even more than our parents, are more afraid to
right.
letting their kids fail, and that's why we're we are so overprotective of our children.
Completely. I think that everything feels like it's so planned out. So again, just kind of analogizing to college, we want everything to be perfect and to line up perfectly, and you want to plan out the rest of your life perfectly, and it's understandable, but it's not realistic. There's not much of a sense of adventure.
How do you teach your kids to have that sense of adventure?
I think it certainly starts with, I just think of travel as certainly one thing to kind of, when we do a lot of traveling as a family, and there are times when they just want to stay home and bed rot for the whole week, and we're kind of like, no, this is precious time we have together, and it's going to be really beneficial for you to look at a completely different culture and to see people who have much much less than we do, and to see how people are struggling to survive. That's really good, and I think that's really good in terms of, I think we've always tried to cultivate a sense of curiosity in our kids, because then if you're curious, then you're more apt to do something that where you're not really sure what the outcome is, right? And so that's something that is a very underrated quality, which we've tried to teach our kids.
What kind of legacy are you hoping to leave, not through achievement, but through how your daughters remember you? How might that help listeners reflect on their own version of meaning and legacy?
We were just talking about this trip we had taken in Mallorca, and both girls immediately remembered how we went on this boat, and both girls immediately remembered how they both had to take these seasickness pills, and they were gigantic, and I got really angry at that because they didn't they're complaining that they couldn't swallow these gigantic horse pills that prevented seasickness. And in my mind, I'm thinking, my God, I can't believe we go to this fantastic island, beautiful island, and this is what they remember. They remember like their dad getting angry because they wouldn't take their gigantic horse pills. Whenever they feel resentful about, my parents didn't do this for me, or didn't do this for me, or they um, didn't do enough here, and that's inevitable, right? They also have to just remember that, we had never been parents before, and we really tried the best that we could. And so I guess, if you have that quote from Maya Angelou, that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. And so
Mhm.
hopefully the kids will forget about what I said and did, and they'll just concentrate more on how I made them feel. And hopefully that was much more positive than negative.
I think that it's yeah, probably the best thing as we can do as parents, right, is to work on ourselves to become better people so that we can model so that our kids can embody the good things about us, right? And I guess that is our legacy, because that's if that's the case, then they will remember us.
Yeah, I think that we've always emphasized to them that we ourselves are works in progress, and that uh, we're constantly trying to improve ourselves, and we're constantly trying to figure out, better way of doing things. And so that should be the goal too. They should be constantly trying to improve themselves too.
Yeah. Well, it's an amazing book. I love it. It's funny. You're quite self-deprecating in the book, which is really great. It's a great read.
Thank you.
So if people are looking for it, where can they find your book?
Sure, it's on Amazon, and I did the audiobook as well for it. It's also available on Mascot Books, the publisher, and also it's available on ebooks on Amazon as well.
Mark, thank you so much for doing this interview with me and for sharing your parenting wisdom. I think that there's so many great lessons in there for other parents. And it's a great read. Thank you.